I suspected when I put my hands on it, it felt so different.
What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning back in. Today we have a very interesting story for you. One of my favorite whistleblowers, David Adair. This is an older interview from him. He does great work on Gaia, the more recent stuff from him. Gaia TV Cosmic Disclosure. You can check him out on there. But this is from a YouTube interview that he did a while back. He's basically a rocket scientist from my close to my hometown in Ohio, like the pretty sure the Mount Gilead area. And he's a graduate from Ohio State, and he was basically a child prodigy. He made rockets at the very early age, and was recruited by Curtis LeMay, which is a bombs away LeMay, is what he's referred to. Very high-ranking military official. And yeah, let's hear his story. I'm going to do maybe like 20 minutes of this video, and I'll make sure to include the other video in the main video so you can watch it for yourself in my description. So yeah, let's get into it.
Silence. David Adair, now a space technology transfer consultant, has come forward with his amazing experience inside the military's top-secret UFO facility.
I was 13 years old when I built my first rocket, and it left the backyard at about 3,500 miles an hour. I was able to build it out of a construction machine shop that my father owned when he used to work for the mechanics and racing enterprises, and we had plenty of equipment and tools that allow such manufacturing to be done. As a matter of fact, our shop's very similar to a rocket shop in equipment and materials. The rockets kept getting bigger, faster, till finally I was able to get funded by a federal grant by a congressman named John Ashbrook, and with that help I was able to go ahead and complete a larger rocket with an entirely new type of engine, which was a fusion containment engine. The two primary engines we use today are solid propellant and liquid propellant. There are about 61 different rocket engines of propulsion systems that you could leave this planet with. Two of them are just a solid and liquid fuel. I happen to just pick one out of the other 61 engines to pick from, and I manufactured a magnetic fusion containment engine, which in simple essence is able to create a magnetic field capable of holding a thermal fusion reaction inside, like a chunk of the sun contained in a magnetic bottle. And when you tap that power, it allows you to have tremendous thrust, which is what makes the rocket go forward. And so imagine being able to tap onto the power of the sun for an acceleration factor. So that's a pretty interesting engine design. So once the engine was, and the rocket was completed, we obviously couldn't launch it where I was launching smaller rockets, which were out in cow fields in Ohio. So we had to go to White Sands, New Mexico, and that was arranged by the congressman and a consultant at the time who was a retired general named Curtis LeMay. And Curtis LeMay made the arrangements from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. We rode down to White Sands on a C-141 Starlifter, and when my rocket myself got there, we started prepping it for a launch. At the time that we launched, which was June 20th, 1971, a plane flew in the same day we did, and out stepped these men in black suits with mirror sunglasses, and they're DOD agents. And so DOD was interested in the operation, and they were alerted to it by the Air Force and probably the Congress and whoever else was funding the program. Among those men, there were some NASA officials there that I recognized. They instructed me to send the rocket down 656 miles northwest of there to a precise set of coordinates that they gave me. And I asked them, why are we landing in a dry lake bed in Nevada? And they said, just drop it there. And I said, I can do that. So we fired the rocket, and it was a really success as far as engines go. It was extremely fast. It was so fast you couldn't even see it leave. It's like You ever try to watch a rifle bullet leave a barrel? That's how fast this engine was. So we landed we were exactly where they wanted it. Then we had to get on a DC-9 from White Sands and leave for the dry lake bed, which is called Groom Lake in Nevada. And I was asking
That's Area 51, by the way.
Y'all notice that these wheels on your plane, the rubber tires and landing gears, we're going to bore more up to our belly in the dirt out there. So they said, don't worry about it. So we got on the plane, and when we got there, they were right. There were twin 10,000-foot runways there and hangars and a 42,000-acre Air Force base called Groom Lake, and it wasn't on any of the maps I was working with at the time. So my rocket was down on the south end of the field at the end of the runways, and you could see the parachutes bellowing in the wind, and we landed and got out. And I was assuming we were going to go look at my rocket right then. No, we got in golf carts and rode to this center hangar, which was a very low, flat-type hangar, but extremely large inside, about 4 football fields. So we pull in there and stop in these little golf carts, and we're just sitting there, and I'm going, well, that hangar's empty. I thought, this is interesting, you know. And then in a few minutes, little yellow and red lights came on flashing, and then out of the ground, or out of the floor, come these little rails with chains on them. They came up around all the doorways, and then the entire floor dropped out from under us. It's an elevator. We went down about 20 stories, and what was interesting about this elevator is normally you have chains that drops these things. These huge worm screws were lowering the platform down, which allows it to carry extreme weight. When we got down there, there was a lot of various aircraft and workshops and offices and such. That was off of the main bay, and then off the main bay were smaller but still rather large work bays. And in the work bays, we went down to one that had something sitting in one of the big workshops. So we went in, they opened the doors, we went inside, and the room was lit up like if you ever seen a car sitting in a paint booth. You have horizontal lights running the whole length of the room, and they arc like a rainbow all the way over. The reason being, like in a paint booth, it casts no shadows. So if you're spraying a car, if you see a run and your shadow's hiding it, you'll put a run in the car. So this was the same reason. It's a good laboratory to do it that way. That means that it's casting no shadows, so whatever you're working on, you can see it without being interfering with the light. And that was the first thing that was different about the room. They pulled the big covers off this thing. And
there were no lights in the room, by the way. So that's one of the weirdest things about this, is that there were no lights, but yet the room was completely lit with no shadows. So yeah.
It was interesting. It's an engine about the size of a school bus, and this engine is pretty much a much larger version of the thing I built. It's also an electromagnetic fusion containment engine, but it is sophisticated and it is powerful. I would have to compare mine to it. Would be like I had a Model A and this thing was a Ferrari. I mean, it's just a tremendous, powerful difference, but we both were of the same engine breed. And this one had been damaged right in the center of the core. In the type of configurations we build, we have dual particle accelerators that cause the fusion reaction. Right in the center of these accelerators is an area that I call the eye of the hurricane, and it's like an infinity pattern, figure 8, and right in the center, it's quiet there on a matter of conversion area. So then this particular engine was a hole there about 4 feet in diameter. They said, sure, as a matter of fact, you can climb on it if you want. So I got up to the engine, and then something really unusual about the engine, other than the design, the alloys itself, just the sheen and color, looked like iridescent color, like when you hold a CD disc to the sun and you see the rainbow. Imagine those kind of colors covering this entire engine and glowing like that. It's really pretty. The color of the engine was unlike any metal or alloy I was ever familiar with, and when I walked to the engine, there was a shadow on the engine. Now, I just told you that the rooms were built where you couldn't have shadows. When I stuck my arm out to it, there was a shadow on the engine, but right on the table, there was no shadow. So it's not a light casting the shadow on the engine. The engine is picking up radiation off my body. So I back away from it, the shadow dissipates. When I walk back up, it's back on. And so when I put my hands on the engine to pull myself up on it, that's where it's interesting, because the alloys in some places were so thin, it was translucent. You could see through it like a sheet of amber. So when I laid my hands on it, this really interesting swirl pattern would come off wherever my skin was touching, and they would swirl out through the metal, going out through the alloy. And I didn't know of any metal that could do that. So I thought, wow, this thing is heat sensitive. It's picking up my body heat waves like that. So when I crawled, and they were really neat-looking, smooth type wave flows coming off my hands. So I pulled myself on up on the engine and started walking over it, and it was huge. It was radically different than mine because it was just so much of a different design. And the way they ran the fusion flows and the way you would run fuel in a fuel line of an engine, this thing was totally different. There was no wiring. Now, my engine was covered with miles of wiring, so I could get all the firing orders right toward the cyclotrons, the particle accelerators.
Did you immediately know that it was alien at that time?
I suspected when I put my hands on it, it felt so different. It felt like a frog belly. If you ever, I don't know if people play with frog bellies, but I did. It looked wet, but it wasn't wet. It's just so slick looking, but it wasn't slick. And it was just amazing, but also had such a texture, and as soon as you touched it, it was cold in the air-conditioned well in the facility, but the minute you touched the metal, it became your temperature instantly. I don't know of any alloys that can do that. So I started going, oh, this may not be from around here.
Yeah.
So I'm walking down the engine, and I go up to where the main core cells are and the particle accelerators. There's a hole blown out there, and I step down into it, just get a better look. Now, at this point of view, I'm down in a hole in the engine, and the walls are real smooth. They're so smooth, the blast, these temperatures like that engine of mine, they run at 100 million degrees centigrade. You work with plasma physics. So when the field dropped down, this engine's metals were exposed to that kind of temperature, vaporized. But as soon as it vaporized at that particular point, fail-safe, it shut the engine off. All this probably occurred in a nanosecond, a billionth of a second. So the blast only irradiated out to about 4 feet in diameter and stopped. What was interesting is the way the engine's metal was whenever there's torn places. You could rub your hands over the torn areas that are jagged, but they wouldn't cut you because they're so smooth. It's more like flesh being torn rather than metal. Well, when I come up, stood back up on top of the engine, I knew, looking at some of the interior parts of it and the way it was constructed, I had enough of what was going on. So I turned around and told them about this firing system here. And they were going, yeah, where is the firing system? And I started to tell them that because I finally figured out what this thing was doing. But then I said, well, why am I telling you about your own firing system if all this is yours? And you got, this isn't from here, is it? Matter of fact, it ain't from around the area, is it, boys? And they started getting upset. I said, let's do some assumptions. This is an engine. I'm assuming it came out of a craft, a big one, by the size proportional differences, probably 300 feet plus, you know, the length of a football field. Well, therefore, it's got occupants. What in God's name have you done with them? Well, that was the wrong thing to say, because they are up on the engine coming after me, and it's time to leave. Well, when I bend down to get off the engine, I put my hands back on the engine. Something interesting. Instead of the nice, smooth wave lines, they would now look like small tornadoes coming off all my fingertips, moving through the metal. And I pulled my hands back, put them back on. There they were, but they were starting to calm down a little bit. And then I realized what this thing was. They grabbed hold of me, the Air Force guys did. We got back in the golf cart and we were riding back up to the surface. And I'm sitting there thinking, I just realized what this engine is. It's a symbiotic engine. The engine is alive. It is an engine that's capable. The reason they couldn't figure out the firing order is that the tubing that was cascading all over its body looked like the same pattern you would have from a brainstem of a neurosynaptic ordering firing order. So what's happening is when the pilots sit down in their seats, their thought waves drive the engine. When I first touched the engine, I was curious and awed by it. The wavelengths were smooth off my fingers. When I was getting down from it, I was totally angry. The engine was not picking up radiation heat waves. It was picking up mental thought energy. That engine is capable of a symbiotic relationship with the pilots.
Did you tell them that?
I didn't tell them squat. That's why they couldn't figure out the firing order. They said there was no.
Yeah, so in his testimony in Gaia, he actually goes on to further explain this situation, what happened. I think he left it out here. He might go into it later, but basically what happened when he touched this machine was that there's these the spindly things came up and grabbed his hands, and he got flashes of this device, and kind of like where and what happened to this device in space. And he claims and said that it was from a different race, and this race is billions of years old, not how we think of as humans, we're thousands of years old or whatever. This thing is billions of years old. This is like an ancient craft that we either found or shot down, and it told he got impressions from it, like emotional impressions of what happened to this craft and where the species were, and that they were trying to find this craft. And so this is really kind of what ticked him off. I don't know if that would have been classified at this time, because this is an old interview, but he has since talked about it in a little more detail, and that's what he says about it. Now, I don't know if he's going to go into it now, but basically he decided not to tell them anything, because what they were wanting to use this for was what is an acronym in the military known as MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction. Basically, in First Strike, this is the concept in the military known as if thermonuclear war were to break out, you have to be mutually assured that you will be destroyed as well. This is like a safety mechanism that the military is very concerned about. And then the first strike capability is because of the speed. So if there would be a thermonuclear, event that would ever happen, the speed at these missiles that they can launch and deploy on another nation or Russia or whoever, they would be destroyed before they would even be able to strike back at us. So that's this is like the level of military egotism, or whatever you call it, defense protocols that they are seriously concerned about. And I mean, obviously so. They recruited like a 13, 14-year-old boy or 17 or whatever he was at the time to develop this rocket for them. He named it Pithalum, which is, he got this in a dream, by the way. His mom actually dreamed about this rocket, and he ended up making this rocket. So he named his rocket Pithalum, but this rocket, this device, this machine that he was actually looking at is also named Pithalum. So it was the story is a weird synchronicity between like his dreams and what actually happened with his reality. And he ends up, I don't want to ruin the story for you, but he ends up sabotaging his own rocket to prevent the people from getting this. Now, he did forget to mention in this that one of the individuals that came out of that airplane was an ex-Nazi. This is through Operation Paperclip. He's a scientist, a Nazi rocket scientist, very smart. And this is kind of like the threat that he was feeling upon him about these people, because they wanted to see what he knew about this, because he was creating this electromagnetic fusion containment device. So they wanted to find out how to apply his knowledge to his own rocket, to this rocket that is much more symbiotic with the mental brain waves that you're releasing.
Wiring or circuitry. No, the pilots brains are the wiring and the circuitry. The engine needs them in order to do all of its functions. In return, the pilots know exactly what the engine feels and how the spacecraft feels. The entire craft is probably symbiotic. Now, before you sit there and blow this off like it's just a bunch of science fiction, let me bring you up to date here to current events. I just left Princeton University. There's a Dr. John up there, Robert John, and he runs the Pear Research Institute. They have a contract from McDonnell Douglas, you ever heard of them? Small aerospace company, to build mental shielding for firing systems on the new F-22 fighters. So people go, what's that got to do with anything? Pilot comes home at night, catches his wife in bed with another man. He's having a bad day. He's now got to go fight a fighter that is so sensitive. When he straps on his helmet, just like the Apache helicopter, you turn your head this way, the gun mounts follow your head. This firing system now links to your brain. Foxfire, Clint Eastwood. Where do you think the Hollywood's getting their ideas? McDonnell Douglas is under construction building a symbiotic relationship firing control system. Where did they get their idea? I wonder. Could have been back in June 1971, and God knows how long they've had this engine. However, it's reality. We have symbiotic engines in aeronautics. We're moving into that area right now with the F-22 and beyond, with our future fighters. So, which is science fiction, which is science fact? Where does it start and end? You can't tell anymore. When we got back up to the surface on the golf carts, there was another problem developing. I already knew that if they could hold this kind of information back, there's a lot of other things. Where did they get their idea? I wonder. Could have been back in June 1971, and God knows how long they've had this engine. However, it's reality. We have symbiotic engines in aeronautics. We're moving into that area right now with the F-22 and beyond, with our future fighters. So, which is science fiction, which is science fact? Where does it start and end? You can't tell anymore. When we got back up to the surface on the golf carts, there was another problem developing. I already knew that if they could hold this kind of information back, there's a lot of other things going to happen. I also knew my rocket was gone because I built it under a federal grant. They're going to take the rocket. Well, that bothered me enough, but the other problem was something they were talking about that while I was standing there being a child, they're not paying attention. And that's when I first heard the terms first strike. And I'm going, what is first strike? And then I started thinking about it. That's June 1971. We're in the throes of Vietnam War. We're in the pitched battles. Wasn't long after My Lai had occurred. We just bombed the dickens out of Cambodia because the Soviets were supplying weapons to the north. We wanted to do surgical nuclear strikes. General Westmoreland did. And the Soviets said, you fire one of those off and we'll go to global thermonuclear war. The only reason we didn't attack each other was MAD, M-A-D, mutual assured destruction. So the only way to win MAD is first strike. Whoever gets there first wins. My rocket engine out there went from 0 to 8,654 miles an hour in 4.1 seconds. It's the fastest thing ever. So if you take that type of engine containment system and put it on nuclear warheads and put them on your own subs, park it off Siberia, the Soviets would never see but flashes of light, and that's it. They wouldn't even have time to move out of their chairs. No retaliation. So if you take out the Soviet Union, you wouldn't destroy the whole country. You would take out all the key military sites and the major cities, and they'd surrender. But if you do that, you'll have to hit another country same day called China. They have nuclear weapons, and they're not going to stand there and watch us take out the other superpower. So about 1 billion people are going to die in a single day. So I'm sitting there going, all because of my engine? Unbelievable. So I scooped up a hand full of graphite grease off of the hangar door there, the wheels, and started crying. And I said, I want to see my rocket. So they thought, just a kid, take him out to see his rocket. I want to see what it at least looked like. So when I went out there with the two sergeants on the golf cart, we got out there. I walked over to it and opened the hatch, opened the particle accelerators, put the graphite grease, just smeared it on the doors inside and closed it. when you turn on particle accelerators and the fuel is using deuterium, ask any physicist what happens when deuterium meets graphite. It's pretty bad. It's a major reaction explosion. So I turned on the particle accelerators with no fuel involved, and I told the two sergeants, it's got a fuel leak, we got to run for it. So we get on a golf cart and take off. I gave it 60 seconds on a time delay. When you engaged, it exploded. It blew a whole size of a football field out there. There's nothing left. Now they have no rocket. Now they have nothing to work with, but they got this kid. So I was told I'm going nowhere for the rest of my life, and it was scary. And they threw me in a room and kept me there for about 10 hours. And then a lot of noise in the outside. The door opens up, and there's this big stogie chomping figure in the doorway going like that, and his name is Curtis LeMay. So he came there and got me and took me all the way back home to Wright-Patterson, and he took me back home to my parents. He told me that they're not going to be through with you. They'll deal with you again. And he was right. So that was the end of my summer vacation in my junior year in high school, how I spent my summer vacation.
What a story, honestly. And he goes on to, he actually, when he graduates high school, he gets enlisted by the same Nazi person, and gets enlisted into the Navy, like a recruitment, you know, and he has no choice but to go with them. So that's another story. I'll go ahead and include the full-length video in my description, so make sure to check that out. Guys, if you like this kind of content, please make sure to subscribe. It would really help me out. I really appreciate everybody that has subscribed this past week, this past month. It really helps me out, helps the channel. I post these videos every single day, shorts, videos, you name it. We're discovering it all here, so don't miss anything. Thank you guys so much. You have a great day, and I will see you later. Peace out.